welcome to Slow Saturday Nights, Prashant. It's really good to have you here. And let's start with dopamine and what you've been doing in the past few months and your journey to where you are today.
Okay, thank you, Pavithra. It's good to be here. So, dopamine, you could consider dopamine to be a storytelling studio or a boutique content studio. And we focus on, gratifying content, stories that we really believe in, stories that we want to tell. So, and that's the philosophy with which my sister Anu Singh Chaudhary and we started this company on. So we have taken it slow, part because of choice and also because it does take time to build your space in the business that we are in,
Right.
especially when it is seeing such a huge transition in terms of the kind of stories that are being told. And we are still trying to carve an identity for ourselves as storytellers or content creators, because we are not in the traditional mold, so to say, as in we do not produce films, we do not produce standard series. We never got into the TV space. So we are fairly new that way. But in the method of storytelling, we are also not creating short form content, or which is, so we are not modern in the sense that we are not very familiar, as in we're not very keen on familiarity. I wouldn't say unfamiliar, because I started my career making short form content as far as a creator is concerned, but we are more comfortable telling long form stories that take time to, build and grow. And that is what we want to do. We started in 2016, officially registered the company in 2016, and then made a small indie kind of a YouTube series, which is called Fiction, which is called The Good Girl Show. That was the time when not a lot of women, not a lot of content was being made where women were the lead characters. So that was a story based in Delhi University that we always wanted to tell. So we just tried our hands at production and completing a content piece end to end. And that's where we learned a lot in terms of what we wanted to do as storytellers. So it was a good learning experience. And then we focused on, and what we realized is the most important aspect of quality storytelling is writing.
Right.
Creating stories on paper before. Next 4 years, 5 years, we focused on creating a lot of, our original content properties, and in fiction as well as non-fiction. And our job is to create those properties and then identify the right partners to work. Our strength is creating those properties and those stories that we want.
Right.
And then we identify. So we are a very small setup, and we intend to be a lean setup where we focus on creating these stories. And when we started, we knew, so there were a lot of stories that we always wanted to tell. And Alma Matters happened, which was one of them. Now, I think this is an inflection point as far as our business is concerned. Because now there is focus on what we want to do. And it is time to fructify the work that we've put in the past 4 or 5 years to build those stories, to find those partners. And interestingly, this is the only solid non-fiction property that we have. Most of the other stories are pure fiction stories. There are films, there are series, primarily drama that we have worked on in different setups. There's a legal drama that we have worked on, and with different sets of people.
Right.
So Anu and we divide work, and it's our job to make sure that the properties that we take, the stories that we take, we have to bring it to its logical conclusion. Anu, and both of us parallelly did a lot of other work to make sure. So we are completely self, so which means we had to ensure that our systems running. We had to do a lot of other work as well, where we which has helped us actually shape our company better. So Anu has written, she's a fairly well-known screenwriter, and she's doing some really quality work. One of her series, Arya, which was the debut of Sushmita Sen on web, is on Hotstar, which did fairly well. She's developing a lot of shows. Because of lack of resources, we were compelled to work with a lot of new talent and
Right.
identify talent that we wanted to work. So, for example, a legal drama that we are developing, that's being developed with a couple of really brilliant lawyers who
Right.
are wonderful writers and who've taken the effort to learn about screenwriting. Similarly, a campus drama that a couple of campus dramas that we're developing. So
Right.
I'm developing with a batchmate of mine who who otherwise is a top marketing guy in the, so that is what where we are at. There are films that Anu and I have developed. So it's all about finding the right partners to execute those stories now. And anyway, what we believe is that each content creator has a maximum of anywhere between 5 to 10 stories to tell. And beyond that, it is better that they realize that they would turn it irrelevant. Very few content creators can survive beyond those number of stories. So our target is to ensure that we are able to tell those 5, 10 stories, whatever we have inside us. And if we are able to, so dopamine as creators, that is our job. For the company, our job is to find the right people and make sure that there is a system in place where we keep getting those people and they keep telling those 5, 7 stories.
Right.
And as long as we are able to do that, the company should do well. Otherwise, if we are able to tell those 5, 7 stories, 10 stories, I think we'll have done a good job out of it. So that is what it is now.
Right.
This is
Right.
the current state that we're in.
And what was really interesting for me was the word that you used, fatur, right? You knew that media was your passion well before you ventured into the IIT area of studies, or well before you had a mature understanding of here's what my career and my interests are, etc. You already had a passion. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I don't think at the stage that I talked about earlier, it would be defined as passion. It was more out of, so when I go back and analyze it, as a kid, we were never allowed to complete films, which was such a tragedy for us. So our home, we were in a joint family and there were visitors. We always had visitors. And we had my grandfather, the master of the house, he had gotten this new VCR in 1990, I remember. And the first film on that VCR was Kishan Kanhaiya. So there was this film called Kishan Kanhaiya. And it was so cruel on the part of the elders that just before climax, so it was my final exam, some final exam the next day. I don't remember what exam it was, but people were watching Kishan Kanhaiya, and I just sat down to watch the film. And when just before the climax, the last half an hour, and I was forced to leave. It wasn't like if the kids can't, if the kids have exams, people won't watch films. There were guests, there were people. So the VCR there would always be films in the house, but we wouldn't be allowed to watch. We were supposed to be the kids who were supposed to study. So I
Right.
couldn't watch Kishan Kanhaiya, I couldn't watch Agnipath, I couldn't watch. And there's a list of films that I have seen only in parts. So there was this incomplete, something that I wanted to complete, which
Right.
was inside me. And the first moment of freedom that I got, I just watched films. So whether it was lying in my house and running away to watch films in whatever films those which were released, films like say Pardes, Virasat, everything. So every Bollywood film that was released, it started with Rangila and then it continued. And when I was in IIT, when there was complete freedom to watch whatever, whenever, So that completely changed it. Still it was Bollywood. When in my third year, IIT Kharagpur was the first campus to have internet connections in our individual in our rooms, and it was very early. It was 2001, which means IIT Kharagpur kind of introduced cinema to India,
Right.
world cinema to India. Because before, into mainstream, in the mainstream, it made it mainstream. People were there, were discerning people who were watching stuff, but making it mainstream, it started there, because
Right.
that's where the seeding happened, right? And that's where people figured out that we could watch anything and everything was available on the internet. So I watched innumerable number of movies, and that perhaps became as an escape. So what I now call as passion was perhaps an escape then.
Right.
And not getting into technology for me, or perhaps a software job, or perhaps an MBA, or whatever the traditional route would ideally have been, was primarily because of the fact that I knew I didn't want to do this. So
Right.
everything almost has turned out as an escape to, you know, ultimately get to something that I like doing. This was
Right.
the only thing. I wasn't clear about. So, for example, my co-director Pratik Patra, he's a dropout. He was very clear what he wanted to do and what he was good at. That's why he had the courage to just take the plunge. I wasn't sure. It took me 8 years to figure out finally what I was perhaps good at. I still don't know, because I'm not as good as these guys, the guys that I've worked with. They have their own core skills. I'm still trying to perhaps find those core skills. maybe
Right.
maybe my core skill would be perhaps finding the right people and getting them to work together for a common cause. But
Right.
individually, one to one, I think I wouldn't stand in terms of skills that these guys have, because they have had clarity. For me, it mostly has been an escape. So
Right.
I think I've been lucky to have these partners. So that's how it has worked out. The craziness has been there. The
Right.
craziness to tell stories has always been there. So I think if you talk about Fitur, my Fitur is perhaps telling stories in any form. So
Right.
that's something that
Has stayed with you and
drives
grown.
me. Yeah, has stayed with me, and that's something. Yeah,
Right. Right.
something that drives me.
And you've also had a very interesting journey in terms of the people that you've worked with, the way that you've, started up. It was kind of serendipitous in some sense, but also, you've had this network that you've built over the years where clearly storytelling has been the glue that kind of bound all of you. Tell us a little bit more about how all of this has been coming together over the years. There's, of course, Anu, your partner, your sister, also a storyteller in her own right, who's taken her own different paths to reach dopamine. And then there's you. You went through IIT and did everything that was expected of you there, came out the other side, took your paths, made and built the kind of networks that have stood you in good stead to eventually bring you to this point where you've told stories about your life or living as part of the IIT network. And I think a part of what Alma Matters does is kind of central to what has driven you over the years. Tell us a little bit more.
There's this philosophy that we go by in Kharagpur. I used to have this core group. In campus you have many core groups, right? So one of these core groups, we went by this philosophy, which was "Aapko sach chahiye ki maza." So, which means every time a story was told, the pursuit of maza was always superseded truth, because everybody has a different version of truth, right? So that, I think, that pursuit of maza led us to actually finding finding fun in any. It stories were a part of our lives. So Kharagpur, so we belong to, at least I belong to a culture. So Anu and I, we are Khalis Biharis, right? And we take pride in our storytelling capabilities. It is rare to find a Bihari who's not good with telling stories. It's almost a part of our, the way we grew up. Primarily, one can analyze it to, the deepest, maybe because of the fact that there wasn't any electricity, so that, especially when we went to our village in our summer vacations. So the only thing that you could do for time pass was to share stories.
Right.
Maybe that was, or we read a lot of stories, whatever it was, but good raconteurs are really appreciated, at least in our culture. That continued with Kharagpur. Now, Kharagpur again was a village in itself. It was basically an island with which what we said to 2000 Robinson Crusoe's in confined in one place, which means there's this what we called there's this term which was a part of the lingo there, which was called bhat. Bhat is basically conversation, and bhat doesn't have a definition like any good free flowing conversation doesn't have, right? So, and that defined our existence in Kharagpur, so much so that my batch group is called Bhat Sansad. So yeah, Bhat absolutely defines life at Kharagpur, because it was again about till internet arrived. It was only about different groups of people randomly doing charcha over random stuff. Again, and plus Bengal is driven by the culture of Adda, right? So it was Adda, just a bigger version of Adda.
Right.
So much so that I remember, and there I found the best storytellers in Kharagpur. These guys were brilliant. You've seen, and somehow it has carried on. So you've seen the series. In the first episode, there is this guy who says "Chhadi ek vichar hai." So that is 1 year my senior. Then you see Biswa, who's an equally good storyteller. These are some of the most brilliant storytellers I've seen, and they are 10 years apart. And every batch has innumerable such people.
Right.
So it was a part of our life. So the format changed, but the stories, the essence remained the same.
Right.
It was about telling those stories and sharing stories.
Right.
And it just, I just, these guys are still telling their stories. I just joined a different format.
Right.
So
how hard was it for you to start up Dopamine? I mean, what was the hardest part of it?
Very. So starting it wasn't really tough, because we actually didn't plan on starting it. So there was a really big investor who wanted to strategically invest into what I was doing. So I had prior experience in terms of, being a part of a really phenomenal business, which really took India by storm, which was TVS. Right. So I knew what it took.
Right.
But I also knew that when you start from zero, you start from zero. That doesn't matter what you've done. And I had my share of heartbreaks in my previous business. So I knew that this time I want to be very clear about who I want to do it with.
Right.
So, and it was a no-brainer that I had to do it with Anu, because we complemented each other, and who else but your sister?
Right.
If you start a business with, a lot of problems get solved, right? So initially it was a breeze, because there was an investor on board, and we just had to, we were signing term sheets, we were creating big mega business plans. But suddenly the deal didn't happen. For whatever reasons, it didn't happen. And when it didn't, we suddenly realized that we are in the red by quite a significant amount. Thankfully, It was for family, just family money. So there wasn't pressure of, returning it immediately. But there was extreme self-doubt, because the series that we had created, it had created its share of fans, but it didn't make any money because it was on YouTube, and the timing was such. So then it took us some time to recover from that. But it was good in a way, because had it not happened, perhaps the way we created Alma Matters, it wouldn't have happened. And for whatever it's worth, I think this is something that I'm really, really proud of. So at
Right.
least we created a content piece that one could be proud of. And that is the beauty of the content business, right? If you create such a piece of content, the worst that can happen to you is you become a quiz question, if nothing else. But there is something that you always have with you. You become a part of a bigger historical setup. So at least now that we've been able to do that. And when we look at things in hindsight, when things weren't going well, we realized that we need to be more forgiving of ourselves. We realized that we need to focus on what we wanted to. When
Right.
there was this investment discussion happening, the kind of ambition and the kind of scale that I talked about was scary.
Right.
And thankfully, Anu was there to keep tugging at my I
Right.
wanted to fly, but thankfully that didn't happen. Now when I realize that, given a choice, I would have thought things better and it would have helped. But I don't don't regret whatever happened at all. In fact, we are more forgiving of ourselves. The thing that when I look at those kids in Alma Matters, the kids that I've spoken to, and I get the same feeling towards myself. But
Right.
only you get optimistic only after things work out, right? If you would have talked to me perhaps 6 months back, I would have said a completely different things. So
In
all of
hindsight.
it is in hindsight, purely in hindsight.
Right.
But it made us, at least the crisis that we faced, it made us wiser, and it made us, so now at least we are more resilient. And that is what one wants, right? It made us more resilient.
Right.
And it holds any company which, if it starts and at the outset it is given a test of resilience, or given a lesson in resilience, I think it survives, it does well. I think
Right.
that's what.
So, for an entrepreneur, I think resilience is an absolute must have skill, right? And your journey, particularly, has had several ups and downs, promises made, things that seemed to be going in one direction, but then there was a complete turnaround. One, is used to this in the technology startup arena, where you go a particular route, you explore it, and then you pivot. And it's been true of your journey as well. And the kind of factors that have shaped your journey have been a combination of both external as well as internal, in the sense of the thoughts that have driven you in a particular direction, your interests in probably telling the right story the right way, etc. So tell us a little bit more about all of the things that have come together to help make you um, the resilient organization that you've become today, and the things that have driven you in the direction to where you are right now. Tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah. So there's one mistake that we commit, which I also thought. We think that resilience is a skill. Resilience, I think, is like muscle. So if you don't exercise, if you don't go through crisis, you don't realize your strength, or yeah, whatever the measure of resilience is. It is only when you go through crisis, and that's where when you really realize how much you want to you know, build it, or how much you're required to work on it. The good thing is that whatever we faced, I think we created stories out of it, and being storytellers. And the wonderful part was that since um, at least I am a storyteller amongst friends, so it's not across mediums. So I like talking about what's happening, and just especially with friends, generally, deconstructing what is happening with our lives. We deconstruct a lot uh, what's happening with our lives. So that actually helped me, put things in perspective and not lose. So I behaved weirdly. And obviously, when you go through crisis, you do a lot of stuff that you don't enjoy. You don't enjoy that part of your personality. But that is, at least the good part is that I remember those things, and most of us do, and that's what makes us, better or wiser or whatever. But deconstructing, so whatever happened or whatever what was that was happening, and having those few friends to talk about it, actually helped us put things in, articulate crisis in lives. So and that helped us perhaps think of stories in a better way, and a lot of personal experiences. If you go through tough personal experiences, it is easier to tackle drama in stories. It is easier to understand characters. It is easier to maybe add layers to stories. So the best stories, I think, are told by people who have gone through the highest level of crisis,
Right.
because they empathize with their characters. They are fair to their characters, the characters that they build. In terms of pure business, it worked well because, for example, I was fighting a case in Bombay High Court for my startup. So I had the choice of, initially I was angry at whatever that was happening. But with time, I started looking at Bombay High Court as this really wonderful, beautiful place. And it is such an interesting place. And none of us have seen so, and it's like what say an IIT is. So however, maybe our courts are treated unfairly. The kind of work that people do there, the kind of pressure that they are in, and despite the fact that the kind of excellence that thrives there is phenomenal. So the amount of time I spent in Bombay High Court led me to actually create a show in Bombay High Court. I have at least a set of characters and a story about Bombay High Court ready. It made me, I find what, so I met two really, really good writers there. And just to partner with them on creating a legal drama was a lesson in itself. So even if it doesn't come on screen, there's a process that I have been a part of, which is a story in itself and an
Right.
experience in itself. Similarly, I was a part of a startup where stuff happened, right? Without getting into the details, it made me understand the entire business in a completely different way. So for me, the way startups are treated now, or the way we look at, say, startups, I have a different point of view. I think I stopped romanticizing the idea of, adding, there's this romanticism in struggle as well, right? And we tend to then, as entrepreneurs, we tend to not know when to perhaps cut our losses. I had to sit at home and then realize how valuable family was. And it is important to have, there are multiple aspects to it. So by the time, even if I would have taken the well-trod path, or the defined path to success, where perhaps things would have so if everything would have worked out, would have been another good story. But maybe I would have missed a lot of, things that we seem to take for granted.
Right.
It helped us decide, as a company, it has helped us decide where we want to go, how much we want to grow, what are the things that we will be emotional about, what are our, perhaps, what is our value system, right? If
Right.
you are creating content, you have to have a defined value system. It has, at least we are clear about our value system, and that will perhaps help us maintain the honesty in the stories that we are telling. And as long as that happens, I think anyway, this is not a $1 billion valuation business that any business can be a $1 billion valuation business, to be fair to it. But I cannot plan for it to be a $1 billion business.
Right.
In tech, you can do that. In the business of media, especially in the business of content creation, one cannot. There is a direction that one can take. I don't know. Maybe tomorrow I wake up and suddenly the ambition and drive is back. So the drive is still there. Maybe the ambition, I just have asked it to, stay put. Maybe if that comes back, maybe yes, maybe we'll take that direction. But we'll not, certainly we'll operate with a certain value system
Right.
where people, the finest stories are important. Yeah. So
Right.
that is what we want to be as a company.
Right. And tell us a little bit more about the teams that have come together over the years in helping you find and tell the right stories. There have been waves, like with any other startup, where you've gone in one direction and there's been different kinds of support that have come together for you. So tell us more about those and how that's contributing to the directions that you will choose going forward.
So it started again, as I said, so it took shape, concrete shape in Kharagpur, where I met some really, really good, awesome storytellers. And that just set the seed for this entire journey. Then in terms of craft, at the first level, I perhaps learned it. So at the first level, I learned it so my brother-in-law used to be a documentary filmmaker. So he's currently not running his own business. So he has taken his, is at least on a sabbatical, a long sabbatical from filmmaking now. So the first projects that I did with him, there was this non-fiction show pilot that we made for Star. That was my first project as far as content or creative storytelling was concerned, where I went on a set for the first time and we shot stuff, and it was exhilarating. In fact, that project helped me, take the plunge in TVF, as where I went kind of all in. Yes. And then TVF had some brilliant people as far as, and the world knows about. So and it was wonderful, working with them. Again, a bunch of really young, driven people who had been just out of campus and were so sorted as far. I was still confused as a 30-year-old. And these were a bunch of 23, 24-year-olds who were really clear, who had learned their stuff and who had worked on stuff. So I was still technically building my skills. And as I had said, technically, I'm nowhere compared to these guys. But people like, say, Sarkar or an Amit Kulani, these guys were really good at what they did. And these guys were really, really sincere. So TVF was a place where I realized that what difference, so talent, a combination of talent and sincerity can make. So we as IIT graduates, we tend to romanticize talent a lot, overvalue talent a lot. And so much so that the philosophy of Chagi explains that, right? It's creating morality out of a disability. So people who take pride in being Chagis, they believe that if they would have worked, they could become a 9-pointer, but they make it sound like it's a choice that they have taken. It's not a choice. They just aren't sincere enough. And they are afraid of the fact that if they put that much effort and if they don't get the result, they'll lose the ability to say that this is a lifestyle or whatever they say. So at least these people who were talented as well as sincere in their field of work, and these guys were good in academics in IIT as well. And that's when I realized that it's about, being honest to what you're doing at that moment. And there was a lot of brilliant short form stuff that we created there. So very talented people, very driven people. And obviously, these are a bunch of people who were redefining content in India there. So
Right.
it was the level of self-confidence that was built because of that. One had the belief that if you tell the right stories, the right stuff, I mean, the right content will work.
Right.
And then sporadically, I met a lot of really good storytellers and really good content creators. And then again, an inflection point was working with Camera and Shots. Camera and Shots is this company who helped me create Alma Matters, who brought this together, a bunch of really driven young guys, and who were willing to take the leap of faith. Most of it, because these are all we were all, you know, maybe perhaps for we are fond of adventure sport, so the fear of the unknown actually excited us. But
Right.
camera and shots and the people that I worked with on Alma Matters. So the editor of Alma Matters, for example, Shivaji Viswanath, he has been my film school. I mean, that guy defines what फितूर is, because there फितूर जब एकदम अपने प्राइम पे होता है ना, तो एक तरह का ठहराव होता है उसमें. We tend to see passionate people as these people who are, you know, who are kind of, for the lack of a better word, dynamic, unstable.
Right.
मतलब पैशनेट के साथ थोड़ा थोड़ा वो ये यूज होता है. जब असली पैशनेट इंसान के साथ एक there's a stability, एक ठहराव होता है, and there's a depth to that entire thing, which this teammate of mine from camera and shot, Shivaji, has. And these guys are all my 10 years junior. Most of these guys, they had come to TVF for their internship, and they were so clear that they didn't want to do what was happening, despite the fact that it was game changing. They were clear about the fact that they didn't want to do that. They had a different path,
Right.
which was phenomenal, right? At when in third year of the year of college, they knew that. So yes, it was serendipity, but thankfully we stayed in touch. So
Right.
since we stayed in touch, these were the first guys I went to that I had something in mind. So they added a definition to, at least a direction to the approach in terms of how we would approach Alma. And perhaps both of us supported each other in terms of the belief, because
Right.
it required a lot of self-belief considering we didn't know what we were doing. So it was awesome. I mean, it was really good working with. And for me, the best part was that these guys are now I'm fed up, and now I want to spend time with people my age. But for the past 3 years, I've spent most of my time with 25-year-olds. So these guys are 14, 15 years younger, and most of the time, so it has been wonderful. I mean, uh, I've thankfully I've started. So I'm not as unkind to say millennials or the 90s kids as most of the people my age are. I'm more optimistic. I'm more optimistic about the world in general. They are more cynical than I am, because
Right.
they give me hope. And so I had been a part of the corporate setup, right, which is hierarchical. Here, they working with them again reminded me of the fact that talent is so in a project, it's not the position or the age or just the talent that defines it. It's basically when and who is doing the most important job, and then that person is the most important and should be the boss. And so it was wonderful. And yeah, so these are the key people. And obviously in all of this, it's needless to mention that Anu has always been there. She brings the method to craziness.
Right. What do you think has been the change in your definition of success over the years? At some point, clearly, it must have been getting into IIT itself. So, how has that changed over the years for you?
I think my father defined it really wonderfully in my first year, and that eased it out so much for me. So I've been, and it's I mean, it's important to say that uh, I haven't mentioned my parents' part, because usually people don't do that. But especially in conversations like this. But my father is one of the best storytellers that I know, and and I think a lot of it I get from him. So storytelling is where, and it came in very early. Although initially, so when I remember my childhood, it's mostly irritating because he gave a lot of long lectures with a lot of stories weaved in. But now I realize that's where I get it from. So it was my first year in IIT, and my uh, parents were visiting. And so first year in IIT, when you are in a lower rank department, so-called lower rank department, is about finding the motivation to do well in the first year and perhaps get a department change. So they were in my room, my mommy and my mom and my mother and my father, and a lot of, I think 15, 20 of my friends were there. So all these Ranchi guys, and everybody had come to visit and partake into the stuff that they brought to eat. And generally, we were chit chatting. And my mother asks me, और पढ़ाई कैसी चल रही है? Department change का कुछ होगा? So my father tells her कि अरे यार तुम भी बात करती हो, जानकी बल्लभ शास्त्री की एक कविता है, सुनी है? Is like the face that they make after 20 plus years of marriage. हाँ, कौन सा? नहीं सुने, बताइए. So my father tells her, उसमें एक लाइन है, अब कितनी साधें पूरी हो तुम रोज बढ़ाए जाते हो, which means कि हाँ, तो so and that and people, my batchmates, they were, I mean, it was one, and everybody remembers that, and that was the day it changed for me. I realized that there is no burden of expectations, and I think by clearing one exam, I have solved a lot of problems in my life. And then it was freedom, full blown freedom. There were times that when my father later visited, he never asked me, but my room didn't have any, course books. So I used to tell him कि library में जाके पढ़ो. But after that, he used to call Anu and ask her कि वो अपनी degree तो लेगा ना? As long as degree ले ले, बाकी सब तो ठीक. So it was so I and he's watched Alma Matters twice, and now, and then he told me, हाँ अब समझ में आता है, हाँ वहाँ दिक्कत तो थी, थोड़ा सा guilt. So I thought that I should just manipulate him like they did in my childhood, but then I told him no, it was a happy life for me, very happy life. I wasn't as disillusioned, and then so that day I think defined the meaning of success at one level, perhaps.
Right.
After that I stopped comparing myself with my peers. I didn't. It was just about finding something that I was good at, and after that I think so. One I'm a normal human being. So when my friends get BMWs, there is a tinge in my heart that I get, but that's absolutely fine, and I feel proud of them as well. And but that's the only, that's the epitome of you know of comparison with maybe others, or being affected by what others are doing, is what happens to me. Otherwise it's mostly about being perhaps better than what you are 2 years earlier. So I don't want to be remembered as, or I don't, when I'm 50, I certainly do not want to be seen as this khadush uncle who really doesn't have a good worldview. So it would
Right.
be better to have a worldview, and perhaps be better than what we were.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah,
And what do you believe contributed to the direction that you eventually took with the telling of the Alma Matters story, or the direction that dopamine took and where you are today? What what was the big push to where you are right now?
it wasn't as bad as it would sound, but we were left with almost no money in our company bank account. So it was almost taking a, and I had just become a father in March 2017. So, and I realized that I went through a massive postpartum depression, because there was 2016 I had set up. It was then in March 2017 that the deal was called off, but at the same time, it was the happiest moment of my life. But it was scary as hell, and I didn't know what the direction life would take for me. I was almost ready to quit it all and perhaps restart prioritizing family and restarting stuff in Bangalore. And I was okay with it, because we were staying in Bombay. Bombay is a costly city. A lot of things were going on. So with this concept, I think so in June 2017, when I visited campus once with a friend, and realized that 10, 11 years back, I had done something in Anand Bazar Patrika, which was about campuses. And that was when I had thought that this is not the way campus stories should be told. And I had seen some stuff. I tried to find stuff on campuses, and nothing like that existed anywhere in the world. So when I went to Kharagpur, I really it was an epiphany that this is a story, and the story of this campus needs to be. Maybe again, it looks like an escape, right? It was an escape. It's what sounds like an epiphany now was an escape. That
Right.
perhaps this is something that will help me escape and will help me find a story. And I came back. I told Ashay, camera and shots, I want to do something. इतने पैसे हैं, इसमें कुछ करते हैं. And then it just happened. We as humans, we tend to overestimate our abilities when we do well, and underestimate the things or the multiple factors that come together to just make it happen. We give ourselves a lot of credit when we do well, and at the same time we are too unforgiving of ourselves when we don't do.
Right.
So a lot of things just came together. For example, Alma Matters. Whenever there was doubt in terms of, so my wife was full supporting it, right? The making of Alma Matters, and there were times when I didn't want to burden her, and I kid you not, whenever that happened, there was a friend who would somehow call and who would know कि कुछ तो चल रहा है, and who would ask कि आलमा का क्या चल रहा है, तेरे को कुछ भी चाहिए होगा हेल्प तो तू ये, और मुझे पता है. And it's just that they it just, I mean, it just happened. We had to do our job. We knew that we had limited resources, so just continued with it. And after a point of time, there was no option but to complete,
Right.
because we so you had to come back.
Right.
It was like that. There were moments of self doubt, but mostly we knew that we were on to something really
Great.
good. So it was only about completing the project.
Right. Did you ever, along this journey, think about whether this was the right choice that you'd made? Self doubt, of course, but
Oh, every day, every day, every day.
right. Have
Every
you ever thought of alternatives? How far have you gone in terms of exploring other avenues, other alternatives, instead of storytelling as your primary choice?
multiple times in my life. So the last job that I was in this company called INX Media, and I got scarred for life after that. So post that, I never joined a job. So I was
Right.
never in a job where I was directly, in terms of part of a setup. After that, it had been consulting assignments. So
Right.
I knew mota moti, thanks to the IIT brand, which is over. But I knew that if worst comes to worst, वो मन मार के और कर लेंगे कुछ ना कुछ. और उतना एक्चुअली फ्रैंकली मन मारने की जरूरत भी नहीं थी, because there was a point in time where I genuinely wanted to just make money and be sure that I didn't want to hesitate. This in itself is a chaotic thing, right? When you're closing in on 40 and you have to hesitate taking out your wallet in a place where you're having drinks. I mean, that's not what you've grown up for, right? And that at one moment in time was almost, had become really important for me. So I was looking at, so I knew, I mean, since I was on to this project, so again, it was an escape from those thoughts. But mota moti, I was mentally prepared that if this doesn't work out, so my wife has a brilliant career. So all I had to do was basically follow her to the city that she wanted to do, and then perhaps figure out something for myself.
Right.
There was a network that I knew. There were things that I know that I was good at. So I would find space somewhere. I knew that, and there were options that I had thought of, but I was waiting for Alma to fail to
Right.
exercise those options.
Right.
Thankfully, it
Thankfully,
didn't.
it
Thankfully,
isn't.
it worked. So
Yeah. And looking back with the 2020 vision of hindsight, what do you wish you had known before dopamine, before Alma Matters? What is that? What are those one or two kernels that you feel that, if I had known this before?
how to deal with a co-founder if I had known this before. But then things would have been completely different. So it's okay. I don't regret it, but yeah, I would have dealt with lesser pain. I would have faced lesser pain as far as starting a company or whatever was concerned. But that is one thing that I think. So I could have, we could have handled stuff at TVF better. That is one. I wouldn't say learning that I would have. Otherwise, I think generally optimistic people, my brain operates, and I'm surrounded by introverts and pessimists. So I know that I operate differently. So I tend to forget the painful stuff more easily than others.
Right.
So I don't know. So that's the only one. That's the one thing that is striking me. I should have gone for a master's wherever, whenever, even an MBA. But I should have gone. I should so have gone to a campus abroad and studied. That is one thing that I regret. That is perhaps if I get another chance, that is perhaps I'll do. Both of us, both my wife, I talk a lot about. Both of us
Feel
do want.
that that's something that's still pending on your to-do list.
Yeah, that's something that's pending. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about, you've taken this path that's fairly different from your cohort, and you've managed to sustain yourselves. Of course, there's a healthy dose of optimism in everything that you've weathered to come to where you are. What has your support group been like, beyond the immediacy of family and friends, and within the confines of home and family and friends, the closer circle? Because a lot of what you've done on this journey has been with their support. But what have you built beyond that in terms of the kind of support that has stood you in good stead? And what's your view of mentorship, being a mentor, receiving guidance and counseling? What has your experience been of all of this?
My strongest support group has, ev- I mean, emotionally, financially, everything. It has been my siblings, my wife. Without that, it wasn't. So that's the biggest. And they have been. It's good that they understand the vagaries of this entire business, and they have trusted me. So that obviously is there. Beyond that, specifically, if we talk of mentors, I think mentors who've been like friends. So there are some people, obviously there are some people who've inspired me, but I've seen them from a distance and wanted to be like them and worked with them as well. But it hasn't been the best mentors have been the ones who've been friends or so even seniors, but who've been friends. Unless for as far as because for any startup, I know this is an important discussion to have. You find the right mentors, you have the right. So for me, it's unless you have a friendship kind of where you can talk about or where you can express unpleasant stuff as well. Unless you have that equation with somebody, and it is a two-way relationship. So it cannot exist in a world where only one person is giving gyan to the other. I don't think that's a very healthy equation, especially when you're running a really chaotic kind of business, right? And there are multiple things to think about. There's family dynamics to think about. There's psychological hits that you're taking. There's the company, of course. So it is important to find friends more than mentors anyway. Despite the fact that I have a wide set of friends, I'm not a very good networker.
No.
So I think where I've lacked is finding the right friends within the industry. It's mostly been, if you look at my coterie, it's mostly been, this IIT or IIT derivative gang. So I wish I would work more or make more friends in the industry, people I could learn from, people I could share stuff with. Otherwise, it's been, I mean, I have my set of mentors. So it's interesting. The mentors that I have. So, for example, Aman Singh is a friend who I have shared the the closest mentor relationship, right? Mentor-mentee relationship with. So we exchange roles. So he runs a business, and there are times when I am the one who's supposed to tell him the right. You need the right people to say the right things at the right time, right? I mean, mentors cannot solve problems. Mentors, perhaps there are people who can get you connects, but really in our business, only connects don't amount to much. It's because we are in a purely transactional.
Looking back on your journey, what would you define as your biggest successes?
My time at Anand Bazar Patrika, I did some really good stuff there. That was my first media job. Anand Bazar Patrika was my first media job, and Pramat Sinha, who was a partner with McKinsey and then had joined as the CEO. When you talk about serendipity, this was the biggest serendipity. Because, a friend of mine was out. He was working. My flatmate was working in McKinsey, and he had gone out for a smoke break. Was coming in, and he met Pramat, who asked him to just join him for a coffee. He said, "I'm just coming back." He said, Pramat said, "I'm leaving," and so on and so forth. And then he said that I'm leaving McKinsey and I'm joining this PBP group. And if there are friends that you know who have different profiles, if there's a spark in their profiles, so I'm building a core strategy team, and you can refer them to me. So he referred two of us, and immediately, and we joined. And it was a wonderful team. There was this team of ISB, fresh ISB graduates. So it was a really solid team that he had built. And we were young, but we were given a lot of freedom to do a lot of stuff. We worked across the company on multiple projects, and it was the most fun that I've had in a job.
Right.
We did one project, then moved on to another, and so on. So, but it was for a very short while, 1.5 years, because he left, then we left. So that was one good, it took us on the upward path in terms of both, So it was my first media job, right?
Right.
What is bigger than that? Because I had no other background. It just happened. I had no MBA and no relevant experience. So that was one. I think the next biggest success was getting married. We tend to underestimate the life partner that we choose and the importance of that life partner. That changed my life completely. I mean, considering if you marry someone who's much, much smarter than you and takes care, and you know that even if you falter, things will be taken care of. So my wife was, so there are two kinds of IITs. एक जो brand बनाते हैं और दूसरा इस्तेमाल करते हैं, and the one जो इस्तेमाल करता है, and she's the one who makes IIT the brand that it is. That perhaps gave me the equal responsibilities. I took it really. So I wouldn't have to worry about a family system running. It's the responsibility of a family system on me.
Right.
और उसका मैंने इतना खराब फायदा उठाया, उसके अगले 10 साल तक वो पूरी responsibility उसके माथे पे रही, which means that's a big contributor to what it is. So I think I did really well as far as choosing the right life partner was concerned.
Right.
And so that was second. I think then third, obviously TVF. So believing in the fact, I think I was one of the earliest to identify that this will go really big, and earliest to believe. I think post that Alma Matters.
Looking back, what is the one most fun experience in your working life so far?
I went back to campus and I stayed there for 80 days. What's more fun than that? I went through a time machine. If
Right.
anything that can come close to a time machine is what I have been through.
Right.
So in my professional life, nothing has been more fun than that. I could see my past. I could
Right.
see who I was in the time that was I was shooting at my campus. So I think that has been the most fun experience in my professional, which is shooting.
Right. Great. Anything else that you'd like to leave for other founders? Guys, watch out for this, or
Stop romanticizing your struggle. It's is what I would want to leave. It is not romantic at all. A startup, creating a startup or a company is like any other job where you're supposed to be sincere, and a lot of things happen because of multiple other factors. So stop beating yourself when things don't work out, and know when to log out, because it is
right.
important, especially for people my age. And uh, and, and I know a lot of founders who just go through a lot of pain because they don't know. We as a country, we are a part of a culture where we don't know when to log, right? Whether whether we are successful or not, we don't know the right time to just leave. I'm not
Right.
talking about quitting. So
Right.
it's not quitting. Quitting is different from cutting your losses.
Right.
So the more one treats a startup like a business, let's learn from our Marwadi friends, and let's treat startups more like business and less like, PR spinning machines. Will
Hmm.
be. I think let's stop romanticizing the struggle behind creating. It's just another job. And see, let's get real about it. The last thing, I'm talking to you, and there is a media frenzy about something that I have done. It won't last for more than 10 days.
Right.
News about fundings, news about, so usually the things that we tend to, that tend to give us hope, or that tend to again, I'm using the term again, but that tends to romanticize our uh, struggle. They don't last for more than 10 years. It's a short year. So anything should be looked at in the long term.
Right.
And it is okay. I mean, be more forgiving of us, of yourselves. That's that. And people are doing much bigger, better stuff. I mean, the people who talk to here, who you talk to, who come to watch this, they are doing bigger, better stuff. So they would be much better placed as far as this is concerned.
Absolutely. I think we've had some really interesting, candid uh, insights from you. Thank you for that, Prashant. And it's been a real pleasure getting to know you and having this conversation. I look forward to having you back with us soon. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you. And
All right.
yeah,
And
thank you
look
so
forward to
much.
talking to you again.
Thank you.
Bye.